You know that relationships are what drive revenue in your business, but it's really tough to not be transactional about it and lean into your relationships. Therefore, I'm going to teach you on this show how to lead with relationships that create massive revenue by building community for your business. Me and Scott have a great conversation about this. I'm Pablo Gonzalez. I want to be your friend. So just stick around and connect with me after the show. See ya.
This is the Note Closer Show, where you get the latest developments in distressed note investing and learn the secrets of how you can control millions of dollars worth of property for pennies on the dollar. Get educated and entertained by someone who has closed thousands of deals and lives to support you in achieving the same. Now, here's your host, CEO of We Close Notes, Scott Carson.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Note Closer Show. As always, Scott Clarkson, excited to be here with you today and jacked up to have this special guest on here. This guy, I will tell you right now, he wants to be your friend. He is in need of new friends. He is the co-host of the Not Your Average Investor Show, the co-founder of BeTheStage.live, which is a marketing agency that turns clients into community and community into your greatest business development asset out there. We know you guys are listening there. You're all part of different communities out there. You just need some help developing those. You guys all know that I'm a big fan of Seth Godin's book, Tribes. I wish we had Seth Godin on, but hey, you know what? We've got just as good somebody who is obsessed with human connection, and he's used his expertise every step of the way in his life, and he's here to help you grow your connections. So we are honored, the man, the myth, the legend. We got to have a drum roll because you loved my sound effect thing here. Drum roll, please. Mr. Pablo Gonzalez. What is up, Pablo? How you doing today, man?
Let's go. I am great, bro. I am super pumped to be on your show. I love when people read my bio, insert their own things, add a little voice inflection the way that you did it. And you were right. Listener, if you are listening, if we are in your ear right now, I want to be your friend. Scott's not kidding. Let's go. How do we do it?
So let's talk a little about this, because I think one of the biggest, we were talking pre-show there a little bit, how, well, first of all, I was on the co-podcast with you guys, Not Your Average Investor. We had a great time with your co-host, Craig, and everything like that, talking about investing and notes and the Jacksonville market. We're going to have Craig on here in a few weeks, hopefully. But the thing is, I think most people fail to realize that community is so important these days, especially over the last 2 to 3 years, right, Pablo?
Oh yeah, definitely, man. Definitely. You want me to start right now? Or
yeah, let's roll with it. That's like the softball for you to toss in there. Come on, man.
I am ripped up and ready to go.
I was like, I don't need one-word answers. Yes, no. Wait a second. Don't make the 10 commandments of podcasting one-word answer. Don't ever do that, man.
Man, you were going at such a high speed and then you stopped. It was like screeching brakes. I thought you were gonna like land a little softer. Listen, man, I've been obsessed with this idea of community for a long time. Like many people, I think that as I progressed in my career and I became a rainmaker, I realized that the way that you build relationships is by adding value to people, and relationships are the atomic unit of businesses, right? Mm-hmm. And at a certain point, when my brother passed, I looked around this church and it had 1,200 people in it, and it blew my mind. And I had this like realization that these 1,200 people, no matter how, were my community, right? Like these 1,200 people had made the 2 years of him struggling with pancreatic cancer much more bearable. They made that moment that was horrible much more bearable. And this is the greatest value that anybody could have at a moment where I needed the most. Mm-hmm. It was the one thing that could provide me a lift. And then it hit me that ever since I was a teenager, I wasn't that crazy about the Catholic Church. And I've had my druthers with it. And the moment that I looked around, I thought, oh my God, this isn't just my church, this is my community, and I'm never going to leave this place. For whatever reason, my brain went to, this is how you solve churn. This is a business model, right? And I looked around, I'm like, man, organized religion is a business model. It's like the oldest business model ever. And then my reticular activator kept going and it kept going and kept going until I'm just like, wait a minute. If I buy a Harley Davidson, I can't switch to a Honda motorcycle 2 years later because I'm going to lose all my friends. So other businesses are doing this stuff. And I've been on a mission for the last 8 years to really just quantify the value of community as a business development asset. And the last 2 years have really helped, right? Because when COVID hit and everybody slowed down and they started to think about what's really important, people started to really miss relationships and what that brings to you. And I like to say that human beings are the quintessential social animal, right? Like we didn't come out of a cave because we developed some super fast speed or some like skin that changes colors. We came out of caves because at a certain point, a caveman looked at another caveman and they're like, dude, if we work together, we can take down this woolly mammoth. Like, let's go. Right. And everything great that we've ever done has come from community and cooperation. So I've been dedicating myself to this for 8 years and feel like I cracked the code, man.
I think you've done a great job, man. Not only from what I know, but when doing some research and background and stuff on that after you booked and see, like, I think you really hit the nail on the head. And I love it. The church being a business model. It's the oldest business model. Give 10% or you're damned. You know what I mean? In a lot of cases. And people can learn a lot from that. But you're so right, is that we have a tendency to attract and surround ourselves with like-minded individuals, whether it's our age, our experience, our race, our sex, whatever it is. We have that community that goes along with it. And that's one of the most important things that people really talk about, is that when we were shut down and couldn't do anything, and that's what most people lack. I mean, thank God for Zoom in a lot of cases, being able to communicate with a lot of people, that helped save me. But those that weren't used to being on that really struggled with things.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I think it's been one of these things that's a long time coming, right? Like you heard of the loneliness epidemic that's affecting white males, basically, right? And it's affecting the world. And when we've seen these symptoms of it, and COVID really, man, COVID caused a lot of harm. People got sick and all this stuff happened, man. But really, COVID greatly accelerated a whole bunch of trends that were already coming, right? Like all the stuff that got disrupted by COVID, except for the travel industry and the hospitality industries, right? Like that, those people, they could have never like seen that coming. But everything else, right? Education, work from home, the need for the emphasis on human connection, remote work culture, like, like all these, the idea that we realized, oh my God, the internet is how we actually communicate with people, right? Like 15 years ago, we did not have the same social circle that we have now, because 15 years ago, you weren't wishing somebody that you hadn't seen since high school a happy birthday, bro, right? Like if you actually look at the amount of interactions you have with people and you get unsentimental about it, online makes up the vast majority of our interactions between emails and DMs and likes and looking at someone's pictures. So I think it all came to roost at a head, and community is another one of these macro trends that was there. And I think innovators and people that were looking a little bit ahead of time during COVID have done very well. And I happen to be one of those success cases.
Let's talk about that. What is the thing that that you've seen the biggest bang for the buck that's really helped expand? Obviously, community, we're talking community, but what's a couple of things that you see people really sloughing off on, that if they just spend a little time or their focus on it, they would see a tremendous amount of growth? What are some things that you see working today?
Honestly, man, are you talking about as far as like trends in community, or are you talking about trends that have surfaced after COVID?
Either or. I mean, you talk about trends that's going on right now for you.
Cool. Listen, man, I think that we are going through the greatest recontextualization of what humanity is of all time at the fastest rate that it's ever happened. And most of the stuff that we really believe in and really care about is still really important. It's just going into a digital context. And there is tomorrow, we're going to be more digital than we are today. And the day after, we're going to be more digital than that, right? So when I think about the stuff that's really working, I believe that, again, relationships are the atomic particle of business and of life. And to me, the people that have leaned into understanding that social media is not just something to like be a whiny bitch on, but it is the new context that we now use to communicate. And the fact that the great transition that we're going on is how do we now communicate effectively when everybody has a megaphone? The people that have leaned into that are doing very, very well. Other things that I think are working. I think that education is getting disrupted. I think educational platform, right? Like we've all just realized we don't need all these enormous university buildings in order to provide an education. You talk to younger generations, man, and they are super financially savvy because of TikTok, right? Like education is being completely reimagined. People that are leaning into that. I think cohort-based education has gone through like multiple iterations. It started off with face-to-face. Then YouTube came out and it became kind of like the asynchronous, make a course, somebody watches it and does it. Then it became about the platforms that concentrated like Udemy and things like that. So you can make a course and they would find you your clients. And now the trend that we're going into is this like cohort online learning, right? Like how do you create an environment where it's not asynchronous, where people are learning together, but it is digital and it is scalable. So I think platforms that are doing that is another great trend. But at the end of the day, it all revolves around how you can bring people together that unite about something that they care about, that makes them overlap goals, which forces them to work together and figure out how to make 1 + 1 = 3 when you add the value of each individual.
That makes a lot of sense. The not having the overhead aspect of things, I think, is one of the biggest things. And we've seen that as real estate investors. People are very used to going to the big workshops or the big seminars and taking time away and dropping. But with, I've been virtual for the last 5-6 years now. I haven't done an in-person event except for my mastermind events. We've really leveraged the power of Zoom with coaching calls and classes, and then of course our podcasts and shows to make things happen. You've done a really great job doing that as well. You want to talk a little about that and kind of the transition or the evolution of that for you?
Yeah, I would love to, man. And I'll start with the end in mind, right? When Greg Cohen came to me at JWB, he knew that he has a great company, right? Like they got these core values, they built this amazing culture, they have a great team. They know that the more time people spend interacting with this company, the better business gets. So he knew that content was the way to kind of like scale those interactions, but he couldn't really figure out how to do it, right? Like the idea of like popping up a phone and talking and trying to give value is kind of hard to do often, especially when you have a 80-person staff that you're running and you're running a $150 million business. The idea of every time somebody does something funny in the office, turning on your phone and saying, hey, do this again, that sucks. Like you start being the douchebag in the room and you don't want to be that as the boss, right? So he felt that real tangibly. When he came to me, I said, listen, Greg, I think that what you need to lean into is this community thing, right? Like you have interesting clients, you're doing an interesting thing, you have an interesting staff. And we went very deliberately into this content creation piece without trying to build an audience, but trying to build a community. And we can get into the nuts and bolts on it, but we launched the show with this community strategy on January 2020. By December 2020, we were having a fan appreciation show where client after client was coming on the show talking about, man, I can't believe I'm part of such an amazing community. This has added so much value to my life. This is why I'm doing business with JWB. We grew a 3,000 person Facebook group in a year. We created a $40 million sales channel. And we went from them having 65% of their new clients coming in through one referral partner that they did not control to 60+% coming in through this channel. And the cost of acquisition going from $6,500 for the referral fee that they were paying to like about $500 per client acquisition. So we completely revolutionized their business model in being able to own their own clientele by reducing the cost of client acquisition and increasing the lifetime value of clients, because clients were coming out of the woodwork that had done business with them before and were reinvesting in them because they realized, oh man, I love spending time with Greg. I love these guys. I forgot how good they were. Oh, by the way, this is a great asset class too, right? So, that's the path we took. And at the center of the strategy is an internet talk show, right? Yep. Because what we're doing right now, I firmly believe in, right? Like podcasting to me, as a fanatical friend maker, podcasting has been the greatest tool to network that I have ever found. And trust me, brother, I've gone for all the tools of networking to find, right? But the key is to create this community is that if you do this live show and you do a little bit of extra effort and a little bit of extra planning, so you get people to show up, you're able to build a relationship one-to-one with strategic people that you want to grow closer to. For example, Scott Carson, who Greg and JWB wants to have a relationship with. You are also, by having that conversation in front of people that you invite live, whether 6, 16, or 60 people show up, you're building a relationship with those people. So now you just went from building a relationship one-to-one to building a relationship one-to-few as well. And when we host these shows, we very deliberately drive the conversation of the relationship between you and Greg was there. The relationship between Greg and the audience is being deliberately driven. The relationship with Scott and the audience is deliberately driven. And the relationship of audience to audience is deliberately driven. And then we take that content and we repurpose it and we put it in all the pipes, right? Like that 1 hour seed goes in 25 different pots across 6 different ecosystems in the form of podcast, YouTube short, micro content for the different social media channels made to fit, blog and email blast. So we call that a relationship flywheel, man. You keep doing that and you keep showing up with somebody that you want to be guilty by association with in front of people that you want to get closer to, and then repurposing the content to make it go wider, and good things just happen, man.
Well, that's the thing, you're casting that net. You're adding every little bit you're doing up there. It's making that net wider and wider and wider. And you catch more fish, you catch more clients, you catch more fans because they show up on a regular basis to see delivering content and energy. You're entertaining. And it's not just you guys talking about stuff. It's also bringing on interesting characters who can add value to your audience, you know? And it's not all, hey, buy. It's all, hey, teach us something. Teach you something good. You know what I mean? Or it's what's going on in the market. And I mean, you guys just celebrated your 100th episode, something like that, if I remember correctly, or
I think we're in like 170 something now.
Okay. My apology. We're getting close to 200 episodes, not 100. My apology.
We're close to there. Listen, man, the way that I see it is that I don't see it as like, I'm not just teaching you something, I'm introducing you to someone, right? Like it's a very deliberate introduction strategy of come, look, and feel, and learn from, and touch, and ask questions to Scott Carson while you're also asking questions and getting to know Greg Cohen. And you saw the chat, man, right? Like we get like 40 to 60 people that show up twice a week, and that chat is just going, man. Like those people are talking with each other, and that's its own show, right? And that is all deliberately driven. And what we've realized, which is to me the really attractive thing about this, is that we created like a $40 million channel year 1. It doubled year 2, right? Like it continues to grow, and we've been able to trace back the majority of this stuff to about 25 people, right? The 25 people that show up all the time are responsible for like 70% of that revenue in one way or another, right? And that's a concept called superfans that this guy Eddie Yoon wrote about. That's really, really solid, and his numbers are exact. It's like 40 to 70% of your revenue is going to come from your superfans that make up 10% or less of your clientele. If you can turn people into superfans, you don't have to do it to a lot of them, right? But those 25 people, when somebody shows up, like you were there's probably about 60 people on that call. About 30, 35 of them are regulars. The other are new. They're like kicking the tires on JWB. And they show up and they're like, oh, these dudes are real. Man, that social validation, it's on, right? When then they show up, tune in, they're like, oh, they're talking to somebody really smart and they're keeping up with them. Then boom, these guys are smart too, right? Like social validation is the name of the game. And then on top of that, now what's happening is that we've created these ambassadors. They've taken it upon themselves to start meeting in different cities in the US. We just had a meetup in Los Altos, California that could not be further from Jacksonville. 26 people showed up to somebody's house and they had a grand old time talking about real estate investing as not your average investor. And we have videos of people like dancing in a living room, being asked on camera, like, hey, when are you going to buy a property? Like, as soon as I can, I'm going to invest with these guys for sure. Like, and we didn't have anything to do with it, right? Like, it's just pipeline that shows up magically, ready to do business with you because you've done the effort of joining them to a group of people, and those group of people now, once you become the connection point between two people, they can't leave you without leaving that friendship. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's incredible, man.
Well, that's the thing about building a tribe. I mean, you show up. People want to see consistency. People want to show up and be entertained, but educated in a lot of things. And you do that on a consistent basis. Yeah, build super fans. Like, hey, I can go and get no bullshit, no smoke blowing up my tail, real information. You guys do for those that don't know, you guys do a live show. And then you also do a deal of the day kind of show, the property of the day show on Thursdays, Thursdays, right? If I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Property of the week. My apologies. Yes, not of the day, of the week. That's right.
Yeah, man.
But that's,
we started doing now. So we used to do the live show with a guest that's an expert in something else, or or a success story or whatever. And then we would do the property of the week on Thursdays, and we would just break down these properties, and then we'd have great questions. Now what we started doing is bringing on a guest investor, right? So like somebody that's a client from theirs comes on and they break down the property, man. Because at the end of the day, like, you don't really care. People care who else is doing this, right? Like if they can relate to someone that's gone through it, and that person can provide the context, everybody's all the better for it, right? Like you don't have to take it from me, take it from my friend. You know what I mean? Like it's easy. So that's what we're doing on 12:30 on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Yeah. Now, for those that don't know, when you talk about revenue, $40 million in the first year, how are you guys calculating? Is that just off of purchases? What's your primary asset class that you guys are buying there in Jacksonville?
Yeah, correct. So primary asset class that they're working in, the only asset class that they're working in is turnkey rental income properties, right? This was inbound leads that came organically, right? Like the increase in what they were getting through their website traffic from lead to close increased by $40 million, right? January of 2020, they had a front page article on the Wall Street Journal. They had like 1,600 leads come in, and they closed like 12 properties. By January of 2021, by Q1, sorry, that wasn't January. That was January that happened. That's Q1, right? Like they closed like 20 properties up to like 1,600 inbound organic leads. Q1 of 2021, they closed like 81 properties off of like 600 inbound organic leads.
Wow.
Yeah.
While going from a percentage less than 1% to, what is that? If you're closing 80 and you had 600, that's 15%. That's a huge increase in closing.
In marketing, we call that flipping your funnel, right? Like when all of a sudden it's like one person leads to many things, as opposed to like many things has to like filter down to one. Man, that's operational efficiency, bro. That's way less people that your sales team has to be talking to that are buying more properties. That's good. That's good for everybody.
Well, that's it. It's good business model because you're closing multiple deals with same people. Yes. Their risk is getting spread out over it. They're also understand things. You also have reduced costs on turnkey stuff because you get the same people working the same market and the same expenses and buying in bulk versus buying onesie twosie here. I would love to know, out of those 80, and you may know this, how many of them were outside of the Jacksonville market?
Oh, most of them.
Exactly.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, man. So you're talking about some of these benefits, right? Like, yes, this is what ended up really happening is that they went from people coming in like, oh, I know about turnkey rental properties, let me look at a property, to, oh, I understand this as an asset class, and you guys are my preferred, bank in this asset class, and I have $200,000 that I want to allocate in this risk return profile. How many properties can I buy? Whereas before, people were showing up like, well, I don't know, is this house what I want? Whatever, right? So we completely positioned it as an asset class, and all that stuff came from the idea that you can just show up and interact, right? Like by the end of Q1, hosting this live show, we realized that their website that had some old dude on a boat with an old lady sucked. It looks like a Prudential website. People showing up to the calls look like us. You know what I mean? So like we completely repositioned the website to not be to, old guy or real estate investors. We positioned it to investing in real estate without the headache, right? At the end of the day, their clientele are like these W-2 investors that don't want to plunge a toilet, but want to own rental income properties. They figured out how to do that, right? So that happened. The idea that we reactivated old clients happened by the end of like Q1, beginning of Q2, because it's like, oh, I remember how great these guys are. And then by like, Q3, it was just like the waterfall just started rolling in. And we also had the good fortune to have an already set press conference when the world took a dump, right? Like we started January of 2020. Everybody knows what happened March 2020. Man, being able to stand up there, right? Like I like to say that there's two things that really bond people really quickly. One is adding value to someone's life, right? Like we are hardwired to reciprocate. If you read Robert Cialdini's Laws of Influence, they talk about this like reciprocation thing, that we're hardwired. Hare Krishnas used to give you a flower and you'd give him a donation. That flower meant nothing to you, but because you got a flower, you'd get a donation, right? The other thing that bonds people, right? So value, we see the value in the education. The other thing that bonds people is vulnerability, right? Like I know anybody that was listening earlier that's lost a brother immediately feels closer to me. Yep. Right, like if you share a vulnerability with somebody, you feel closer, right? So going through that COVID experience where everybody got to show up to this thing and they were all crapping their pants about the same thing, and we all went through it authentically, right, without blowing smoke, and just telling them, hey, this is what we think is going to happen. Yes, we're all worried about home prices going down, but what we're seeing is this months of inventory is still way below the actual equilibrium. So we don't think it's going to happen short term. Just hear us out. People got to breathe. People got to figure it out. Rental collection took a little bit of a dip, but not a huge dip. And people got to breathe through it, right? Like, and then when we came out the other side, it was like, man, we were there in the shit. When stuff was tough, people were able to show up for us. And, that's that, when you show up for somebody in tough times, that's when you build true bonds.
Amen to that, because anybody can do it in a good time. It's when things hit the fan and, we all go through ups and downs. You can't say life is always sitting pretty, because we've seen it. Things go up, go down. And real estate is one of those things that has more than happened than a lot of other things too, right, Pablo?
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell me about Be The Stage. Tell me a little bit about that and what you're doing with that. I know it falls in line with what you're doing with Greg and everything, but talk a little bit more about that for our audience out there.
Yeah, man. Listen, JWB is like my like flagship client, right? Like Greg really took this shot. So kind of what I was telling you, man, I had that moment where my brother passed, and I realized community was the future of business development. At that point, lucky for me, I had created all these different young professional groups in Miami, and I kind of had this like audience, right? And at one point, I got invited to speak on a stage in front of the Economic Development Agency of Miami about smart cities, because at the time I was the director of sustainability for a hospital developer. And last minute, I show up because my CEO didn't want to go, and I shared the stage with the head of Latin America for Cisco Systems and the head of the Smart Cities Initiative of the World Bank, and me, who at the time felt like a loser, because after my green building company got acquired by this developer and they got acquired, I was kind of pigeonholed in like a dead end zone in my career where it's like, yeah, go talk, and we don't really care about what you're doing, and you're capped at like $100,000 a year, and nothing's going to happen. But when I showed up to that event and I did what I do, I came off the stage and there was like 7 people deep waiting to talk to me. And that had never really happened to me. And, like 4 of them were vendors trying to do business with the company thinking I was important when I'm not. 2 of them were other developers. I was like, hey, how much is it for a guy like you? And another guy was this like young guy, Will Beckham, that I'm still friends with. I was like, man, I want some mentorship in this area. I care about it. And what hit me at that moment is that the stage is like the ultimate social validator, right? Like when you're in an audience and you see someone on a stage, you automatically assume that they're more important than they think they are. And it gets exaggerated when you're guilty by association with people of a certain ilk on that stage. So once I realized that happened, I was like, oh man, I can do this trick. And I reached out to this like developer in South Miami that I wanted to get the business of. And I was like, hey man, what you're doing is transit-oriented development. I'm the director of sustainability. Let me put you on the stage with this politician on the board of one of my charities that is super big on transit. And let's talk about the importance of transit-oriented development to the young professionals of Miami. Guess what? A week later, we were backdooring a $60 million project. Wow. So I uncovered this as a relationship builder of this like trick that's like, man, I don't have to be super transactional if I can figure out how to add value to people. And the stage thing is the key. So I just kind of iterated through that, didn't shut up, got the opportunity to join this like startup that was like a total dumpster fire. When I get there, my business development plan was not feasible because they didn't understand their cash flow situation. So I started doing the same thing on Zoom in 2018, right? Like hosting these like regular calls and figuring that out. A year later, had saved the company. 2019, I decided to start my own company. And I took like this 90-day purposeful pause to figure out where I want to be when I grow up and reverse engineer. And what I realized was that I want to prove that community creation is the most viable tool for business development. So it took me a couple months, landed my first client, kind of just selling community. And it was this guy, Brendan Kane, who's one of the world's foremost content strategists, who wrote this book, 1 Million Followers, because he built a 1 million person following in 30 days. Right. And as I built this like community for him on the back end of this like free book plus shipping funnel, just like right now, I've kind of become an expert on rental property investing. You know, like I got really knowledgeable on content, and I realized that nobody buys community on a Monday morning. They're like, oh, I want a community. That'd be great to have. But what I really want is good marketing material. What I really want is opportunities to talk to my prospects. What I really want is a way to get clients, right? Day one. And that's when I met Greg, and I kind of like repositioned the whole thing as like, no, this is a content creation, content marketing play. And that was the birth of Be the Stage. Because to me, it's less valuable to be the star of the stage than to be the stage itself, right? Like if you are the stage, then instead of trying to be king, you're the kingmaker. And everybody that wants to be a king comes through you, right? So what we do is we figure out these creative ways of creating content that highlights the relationships that you have in a way that puts your clients and your network on a pedestal and creates this organic tools for growth. And this Relationship Flywheel internet talk show is one product. We have another product for if you're gonna get a trade show booth at a conference. We run kind of a similar play where we do these like thought leaders of a conference play, and that's done. We also have if you are a smaller business and you're looking for, you know, great sales enablement tools and client testimonials, we have a process of doing that then turns into revenue producing content. And we recently launched a boot camp, like a cohort online, right? I was telling you about cohort classes, a cohort online boot camp where we teach the methodology of the Relationship Flywheel. Because it really struck me that in 2020, you know, I was the host of 2 podcasts in 2020, my own podcast and the Not Your Average Investor Show. My podcast made like 65 grand, right? Pretty good for a podcast, pays for itself. The Not Your Average Investor Show made 40 million. and it was because we pursued this strategy, right? So like we're teaching the strategy and how to execute it at a super, you know, like a low price of $497 for like $100,000 a year product. Because I really just want to evangelize this whole process of valuing relationships over transactions. And the way that you're able to do it is by scaling your relationship building through content. Can you explain the relationship flywheel that you mentioned for those that aren't? Yeah, please do. Yeah, listen, the relationship flywheel has 3 pieces: value, connections, and content, right? And at the center is community, right? So if you can take inventory of what your clients and the people that you want to serve care about, then you can figure out a way to serve it to them via people that you know, right? So like if I know, for example, JWB, their clients cared about real estate education, other asset class education, Jacksonville market, who's handling my money, and who else is doing this, right? So once we figured that out, we're like, all right, who can we introduce them to that can allow them that access, right? So that's the value piece. The connections piece is when you're hosting this live show, you're driving those 4 layers of connection, right? What we just explained earlier: host to audience, guest to audience, host to guest, and audience to audience. And if you're doing that stuff correctly and you're taking that content and repurposing it really efficiently, then you are taking that one seed, planting it in all these different pots across all these ecosystems that can be flowered anywhere. And the more you do that, and the more that you curate that community via those values, the more that it creates this like windfall of positive effects. So that's the basic of it. At the end of the day, what we're teaching is, you know, how do you strategize it for you? How do you get people to show up to a live show? How do you execute on a live show? How you repurpose the content? How you distribute it? Because that's what everybody's like. What do you talk about? Who do you bring on? How do you get them there? And how does it make you money? Is kind of like what we're teaching at that bootcamp. Yeah, no, it's a beautiful thing, and it's something that I see it because we do a lot of that stuff with ourselves too, with our regular calls and then the community Facebook. So it's always great to speak the same language. Because not everybody understands that, the importance of that. You know, it's just not recorded and they will come. Or especially in the podcasting industry, you have a lot of people that, what's the least amount I have to do? Well, that's the incorrect question. Is what else extra can you do to add to people's importance and value, right? Yeah, man. And I saw you, you know, when you when you sent me some kind of like automated LinkedIn request, I was like, oh, I like this guy, right? Because I knew it was an automated request, but the moment that I tapped into you, I was like, this dude gets it, because you're executing very, very similar strategies by having your Facebook group, by understanding that the value to the people that you want to connect with is providing this place where podcasters meet guests, and every podcaster wants to do that. You understand that everybody that has a podcast has a stage, and anybody with a stage is a very, very valuable person, right? Like, I see you executing on that stuff, man. I think you do it. I think you do it brilliantly, man, which is why I'm so attracted to you as a person, Scott.
Well, same here, Pablo. But that's the thing, is it's so easy out there, and some people figure, oh, this is going to cost a huge amount of funds to do. And honestly, it's time and honing your craft a little bit each day and showing up on a regular basis. I know when we started doing the No Close Show podcast back 5+ years ago, we were doing just a Facebook Live daily, 8 minutes to 50 minutes, and then that changed. Obviously, it's okay, let's do it via Zoom and do that and share it a few more places. Let's do it regular. And then, okay, let's turn it into a podcast that we saw some traction and stuff. And obviously algorithms change on stuff like that. But what I love is when people beat the Facebook algorithm through their own groups and delivering, when people continue to show up like you guys do. And so kudos for what you're doing. We all know that Facebook and other things it'll limit the amount of people that will see your posts, but when you build value, get people to show up on a daily basis, kind of like what we do with Note Night in America and what you guys are doing with your Not Your Average Investor podcast, which is awesome.
Yeah, man. And once you get into it, you start finding all these other slivers of value that add to it, man, right? Like the idea that if you're doing this stuff, right, a couple of tips for people that have podcasts and are doing the bare minimum, and how to think through it a little bit. Anytime before I take a meeting with somebody, I say, oh, you know what, man, I can't wait to meet you. Do you have a podcast that you've been on? Because I want to get to know you. And oh, by the way, here's mine, right? And I serve them the episode of about me that I want them to like understand why I'm so freaking cool. And if they listen to it, right, like if they spend 40 minutes listening to that, they show up to meetings and they're ready to go, man. Like they're ready to do business with me, or they're ready to build a relationship. They're ready to acquiesce for whatever, right? So like the idea that once you start doing that, you start realizing that, man, I have these speaking points. I have a way to like cook someone when I'm not around and get them to like me when I'm not around. And you start deploying that. Another thing that I do is if there's somebody that I want to meet, right? Like I sell to marketing leaders and sales leaders. I'm part of these like communities that have like CMOs and emerging CMOs in them. This dude came out with this book about storytelling that is phenomenal. It's called The Narrative Gym for Business. Check it out, by Park Howell. And it talks about this ABT framework for storytelling that's super valuable, right? It's like the and, but, therefore. There was a big buzz in the marketing group about like, oh man, this is really good. Who's this Park Howell guy? He's come out on these episodes. Telling the organizer of the community, oh, we should have him on. Guess what I did? I reached out to Park. I'm like, hey, Park, I'm part of this community. Why don't you come on my podcast? I do these live shows. I invited everybody in my community, and boom, I made a huge splash inside of this like group of people that are my ideal clients, right? Because I have a stage, I can leverage it however I want. Right. And now I'm friends with Park. Well, I don't know if I'm friends with Park, but Park knows who I am. And like, if I ever want to have my own event, I'm going to reach out to him. But it also connected me to all these CMOs of tech companies that I was just like in there, and they're like just commenting and whatever. Now they know exactly who I am, right? And then that got me a speaking opportunity in front of that community, which has greatly helped my business, right? So it's just like once you get into the content game, and once you realize the value of a stage, you can start to leverage it strategically however you want.
It's exactly right. You can leverage it, and you got to think with the end of the mind and kind of reverse engineer it. So I heard you say that you did that earlier on. What's the end in mind? What's the end game for Pablo?
Man, end game for Pablo is I really want to be the person that champions this relationships over transaction thing, right? Like as I grow in my company and evolve my messaging, because I get so many chances to speak to people and like spit facts and like see how it sounds and hear it back again, I'm starting to really realize that, building great companies is one of the most enduring, sustainable ways to really affect change, right? To really change the world, because most people are so affected by their workplace that they come home empty, right? And if I can champion these companies that are winning growth awards like the Inc. 5000 while winning best places to work awards and delineate what those common strands are, what I'm finding is it's this core value stuff. It's this like mission driven stuff. And it's this like relationship over transaction philosophy. And if I can affect the business world in that way, then I can make people's lives much, much better. And at the end of the day, man, for whatever reason you believe it's happening, we are going to densify as a species, right? Like the world is getting more humans born than are dying, and there's less land than before because of sea level rise and whatever, and you can blame it on whatever you want, but there's less land happening, right? like the ocean's rising. So we're headed to this future where we already see these like mass migrations happening, right? Like the Syrian crisis was one, right? Like you saw this mass migration led to all this conflict. You've seen what's happening in Ukraine leading to this conflict. And we're inevitably going to get in closer and closer quarters. If we can understand that the person in front of me is a value, is an asset instead of a threat, that is the key to human existence, right? Yep. Like, and the more different you are than me, the more I have to learn from you, right? Mm-hmm. So that is really my overall goal, is to affect change in a way that people start to value people different than them as an asset. And that allows us to continue to, I really do believe in the densification of cities. I think more people together, more good shit happens, right? But like the problem is that we've been trained to fear the other. And I think that you should be really curious about the other. And I plan to prove that stuff at scale.
I love it. I love it. I agree with that as well. That's why like minds think alike in a lot of cases, but they have different backgrounds and different stories and different experiences to bring to the table. And we can all do a lot more by learning from others out there that are different than us in a lot of ways. So there for you. Pablo, this has been awesome. What's the best way for our audience, our listeners, and our tribe to reach out to you, to connect with you, find out more what you're doing, and keep up with you?
I would love to see you on the Not Your Average Investor show, right? Like if you're listening to this show, you like real estate, we're talking about all different asset classes of real estate. It's a fun time. It's a great asset class to get educated in. JWB is amazing. Like I don't work for them. I'm just their biggest freaking fan. So go to nyais.com. That's Not Your Average Investor show, nyais.com. Register for one of the shows, show up for the fun time that Scott had. And or just register for it, get reminders, check out the podcast, check out the YouTube thing, leave it a rating, share it to a friend. I want to be your friend. Show up to the show, say hi to me, tell me you came with Scott, and please, 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 please go and share Scott's podcast with your friend. Leave him a review. Scott works real hard at this stuff. He's awesome. He's entertaining. He's changing the world too. So like if you've listened to this show more than once, just like go in your app and hit 5 stars. It takes 2 seconds, man. Just do him solid.
That's awesome. Checks in the mail for that, Pablo. I appreciate it. All right, everybody. Well, hey, listen what Pablo says. Start learning. Start looking at ways that you have your stage, or you can expand your stage or provide a stage, and share your knowledge and your lessons, and use your stage as a great way to pick the brains of the folks that you want to learn from the most as well, too. So go out, take some action, everybody, and we'll see you on the top, everybody. Bye.